Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 321. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show. Just want to remind people that they could share the show from the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. The video version goes up on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. You can find the show anywhere you can listen to podcasts, and you can support the show by doing your CBD shopping with Paloma Verde. We've had a almost 2-year partnership now with Paloma Verde. Everybody who uses their CBD gets back to me and tells me that they absolutely loved it, that they're happy with their purchase, repeat customers. The dog treats are probably the thing I get the biggest feedback on. People love their dogs. CBD dog treats, especially aging dogs or anxious dogs, tend to be very helpful. And then also, I personally like the sports cream, but a lot of people get back to me on the soft gels and say, hey, they're really helpful for anxiety, sleep, and a whole host of other issues. So whatever you got going on, check out Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code PEACE, and let's get into the show. First story today from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Ultra Hawk Liz Truss to be the next British Prime Minister, and I believe actually today, September 6th, she was the whatever British version of sworn in, and she is now officially the Prime Minister. So Dave writes, British Foreign Minister Liz Truss will replace Boris Johnson as the British Prime Minister after the UK's Conservative Party voted to make her the leader of the government. She beat out former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak and is expected to formally be named Prime Minister by the Queen on Tuesday. As the British Foreign Secretary, Truss has delivered some of the most hawkish rhetoric against Russia in NATO's response to the invasion of Ukraine. When the war first broke out, Truss said that she supported individuals from the UK who wanted to go and fight in the UK. And this is something that I talked about a lot on the show, especially in the first few months, how Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Liz Truss, the British Foreign Secretary, were really the most hawkish people in the Western sphere when it came to Ukraine and Russia. And this was very concerning, obviously, because as the top diplomats from the U.S. and England, these would have to be the people that go to Russia eventually, have some conversations with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov to really work through and figure out how we're going to end this war in a peaceful way. But obviously, with them being extreme hawks, that never happened at all. While campaigning to become the prime minister, Truss said that if she took the position, she would follow in Johnson's footsteps and be Ukraine's greatest friend to ensure that Russian President Vladimir Putin falls in Ukraine and suffers a strategic defeat. According to a report from the Financial Times, Truss said her team have been frustrated that the U.S. hasn't taken a harder line on Russia, even though Washington has pledged over $13 billion in weapons for Ukraine, dwarfing the $2.8 billion in military aid London has committed. While the U.K. isn't contributing nearly as much money as the U.S., Britain is one of the leading NATO supporters of Ukraine. The British are currently training thousands of Ukrainian soldiers inside the UK with the goal of training 10,000 within 120 days. According to reports from the Times and the New York Times, British Special Operator Forces are on the ground in Ukraine. Truss has voiced her opposition to negotiations with Russia, saying talks could only happen after Moscow is defeated. Johnson frequently discouraged negotiations and reportedly played an integral role in the failure of earlier peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, a pattern that will likely continue under Truss's premiership. Truss has also been hawkish in her rhetoric against China and has called for a global NATO that's capable of handling Taiwan and the broader Asia-Pacific region. She's expected to be confrontational with Beijing and has repeatedly classified China as a threat to the British national security. During a recent town hall, Truss was asked by a UK host how she felt about if she had to use a nuclear strike, which the host recognized would likely mean global annihilation. Truss said, "I think it's an important duty of the prime minister, and I'm ready to do that." When asked again how a nuclear strike would make her feel, she just responded, "I'm ready to do that." We talked about that on the show. Will Porter, one of the news editors at the Libertarian Institute, did a fantastic write-up on that. And Will Porter is the co-author on the article I wrote yesterday for the Institute. Ukraine asked Europe for more weapons, offering gas to curb rising prices. On Monday, Ukraine's prime minister met with the European leaders to request more weapons and suggested Kiev could help bring down gas prices. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell pledged the bloc would continue to support Ukraine no matter what. The Prime Minister made the proposal while attending the EU-Ukraine Association Council Summit in Brussels. He said, "We need more modern weapons such as air defenses, missile defenses, and ship defense." Additionally, he requested aircraft and armored vehicles. The government in Kiev has relied on America and its European partners to fund and arm its soldiers as they fight to repel invading Russians, with Washington sending tens of billions in weapons and direct economic support. In April, Kiev and Moscow had worked out the broad deals to end the war, but Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky was pushed to keep fighting by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. In addition to the Western support for Ukrainian forces, the U.S. and its allies have launched an economic war against Moscow. The sanctions regime was intended to cripple the Russian economy and halt the Kremlin's war machine, but has largely backfired, with Europe now plagued by high energy prices as Russia finds alternative buyers for its oil and gas. Along with requesting more weapons, the Prime Minister of Ukraine said Kiev could help ease high gas prices on the continent. 30 billion cubic meters is what we have in our gas stores, and we could offer some of it to our European partners in order to replace the Russian Federation in the unstable market, he said. Last week, the energy war intensified when the G7 announced it would place a maximum price on Russian oil. The Kremlin responded by announcing the indefinite closure of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, sending gas prices skyrocketing by as much as 30% in Europe on Monday. Borrell suggested the EU is committed to supporting Ukraine's war effort no matter what happens in the coming months. We will provide our support politically, financially, humanitarian, and military as long as it takes as much as needed. And we continue to hear this rhetoric from Western leaders that no matter how poorly this war is going, no matter how much we are suffering in the West from this war, they are in no way going to curtail the war. And we saw that in April they had a chance to end it and they chose not to. And so again, this war isn't about the people of Ukraine. That's not their perspective. Their perspective is about weakening Russia. It's as simple as that. Now, this next article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. On the last show, I spent a lot of time talking about the economic war between Russia and the West. I thought this was really, really important, and I wrote a whole big article on it. So I recommend if anybody wants a lot of details, go check out that episode. But for just a very short recap, last week, the G7 said that it would implement price caps on Russian oil, but did not say what those price caps were. In response, later that day, Russia announced that the Nord Stream 1 pipeline would close indefinitely. So here we have Dave writing, Russia warned Monday that would retaliate against the plan to place a price cap on Russian oil that the G7 has agreed to implement. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters there can only be retaliatory measures. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and other finance ministers from the G7 announced their intention to implement a price cap on Russian oil on Friday, but the plan requires cooperation from Moscow, and Russian officials made it clear they would not comply. We will simply not supply oil and petroleum products to such companies or states that impose restrictions, as we will not work non-competitively, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said last week, if Russia retaliates by cutting oil production, global oil prices could soar to astronomical levels, analysts and experts have predicted. Analysts at JP Morgan Chase said if Russia reduced oil output by 3 million barrels per day, it would bring prices to 190 barrels per day. In the worst case scenario, Russia would slash oil production by 5 million barrels a day, bringing the price up to $380 per barrel. The details of how the G7 plans to impose the price cap aren't clear. In a statement, the G7 ministers said that the price will be set by a broad coalition and that the cap will be implemented along with the next round of EU sanctions, which are set to take effect in December. The EU sanctions will ban the import of Russian oil with some exceptions and will also prohibit issuing insurance for maritime shipments of Russian crude. Russia relies on European for shipping insurance while it could find alternatives, and an initial shock could raise oil prices. The idea of the plan would be that the EU ban on insurance would be reversed if oil is being sold at a set price, but the plan relies on cooperation of Russian oil buyers, including China and India, who are already purchasing Russian crude at discounts and have little reason to risk their agreement with Moscow. And so I think Dave, takes a little bit of a different look at the price caps and what the problems with those are, and why ultimately they are not going to work here in what the West is trying to achieve. So just a few more stories on Russia from my roundup today. This from Voice of America, that's the U.S. government outlet, but they announced that the U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, has left his post and announced his retirement from government. Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com wrote around 70,000 protesters marched in Prague on Saturday to demonstrate against the Czech government over rising energy prices and demand to end sanctions on Russia and arms shipments to Ukraine. And so we can start to see now there is some real unrest mounting in Europe directly over the support for the war in Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry said Saturday that Ukrainian forces attempted to capture the Russian-controlled Zaporizhia nuclear power plant on Friday night. That's the ZNPP. The IAEA is currently there. I haven't read any reports from the IAEA on this, so it'll be interesting to see how this is handled, and it could give us some insight into what we can expect going forward from the IAEA if they are going to condemn Ukrainian attacks on the facility, and if they're going to assign blame or if they're just going to say there was some conflict around things like that. So I believe, Russia issues sanctions on several Americans, including White House officials, senators, and celebrities like Sean Penn and Ben Stiller. A bunch of senators were sanctioned. I believe it was Gina Raimondo, who I believe she was governor of Rhode Island and then made the transportation secretary. So not a super significant round of sanctions from Russia, but kind of see that this economic war between the two sides continues to wrap up. So, I want to talk about a few stories from the Middle East here that have occurred over the past few days. The first is from Fox News. The U.S. flew two B-52 bombers over the Middle East. This was a show of force, no doubt, to Iran. I'm sure on the next show we're going to spend a lot more time breaking down what's happening with the Iran talks, but currently it doesn't look good for saving the deal. I think it was Joseph Borrell said that the talks are in danger. That's the EU's top foreign policy diplomat and the guy who's really been pushing and trying to save that agreement in recent months. And so if he's saying that the deal is in danger, that could be a real warning sign. So we see this more militarism going on in the Middle East. Israel carrying a lot of airstrikes against Syria. Last week they hit the airport in Damascus and crippled one of the runways for I think a day or two. I don't think it was an extended period of time, but it did do quite a bit of damage. The EUS has agreed to sell Israel more KC-46 aerial refueling tankers. I don't think Israel is going to get them for at least 3 years, but these, as Connor Freeman, the co-host, has discussed several times on the show, these are critical pieces of equipment for the Israelis to be able to carry out an attack on Iranian nuclear facilities using their air force. They would need to refuel in the Middle East if they don't have these tankers. So it's possible, I guess, the U.S. could give Israel these tankers before they get their own shipment of them, but it seems at this time that Israel will at least be waiting a few years to get their hands on any of those. A few stories here. I want to keep talking about Israel and mention that the Israeli government in Tel Aviv has released this report on the killing of the murder of Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. The report says that she was likely unintentionally killed by an Israeli soldier, but Tel Aviv will not investigate further. And so this is, I think, even less than what I expected, which really wasn't a whole lot. But there have been times where Israel has, thrown a soldier a little bit under the bus. One, the soldiers got 9 months because he executed a Palestinian man that was just laying in the street. He had already been shot, but it was a clear execution in the street caught on video. And so he was given 9 months for that. So there are limited circumstances where Israel has punished and held its soldiers accountable. But in general, they tend to get away with things like this. And that is what we're seeing here, despite the political pressure, despite Shireen working for Al Jazeera for 25 years, being a well-recognized figure. I mean, this is a number one figure. This is like Megyn Kelly, going out in the streets. Shireen, I'm sure, has done more impressive journalism, but just, for American audience to understand, had, Megyn Kelly been shot in the face by a Russian sniper, I think we would be irate if the government in Moscow put out a report that said, well, it's likely that she was killed by a Russian sniper, but we can't be sure. But we are sure that if she was killed by a Russian sniper, that sniper didn't do it on purpose, because our soldiers don't do that. When it was very clear that they were targeting these journalists. Shireen was very clearly, as well as the other 4 journalists that she was with, marked in press, not only having on bulletproof helmets, but bulletproof vests with press written on them. One for colleagues who was also there wearing press was also shot. And so it's kind of hard that you could accidentally fire multiple rounds at journalists and claim it was an accident, shoot multiple journalists. And then, as Palestinians came to try to rescue, Shireen's body, because she had already been killed, obviously, because they shot her in the face. And then her colleague, who was also pinned down by the Israeli sniper fire, they continued to fire at the Palestinians. So this is, very clearly not an accident. I don't suppose that the White House is actually going to do anything about this. My guess is that the maximum amount we see the White House do here is issue a statement saying that we are very unhappy with the government in Tel Aviv, or we wish they would investigate further. Or they're not going to say we're unhappy. They'll say we wish they investigate further, or maybe something like that. We wish they would review some of their policies, but certainly no demands, no leveraging of the $4 billion in U.S. military aid that we give Israel every year. Nothing like that. That merely, maybe that this statement was so mild that we do see the Western countries issue a slight, we wish Israel would have done a little bit more here, I guess is what I think will happen here. All right. Next up, the U.S. is reportedly growing its military presence in Syria. This weekend, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that the U.S. has set up a third military base in the northern Haska province of Syria. And so this is, the Kurdish area. Unsurprising, I guess it would be at least 4 bases in Syria total then, as there is another one in Al-Tanf, which is in a different area of Syria. So the occupation of Syria appears to be going on for quite a bit longer. And then the last story I have today, I know it's a little bit of a short episode. I'm sure I will have a longer episode on Thursday with Connor and plenty of content to come up this week. But the last story is the Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a statement on Monday responding to recent Israeli attacks in Syria, dismissing the narrative that Israel is attacking Iranian targets. I think this is important for a couple reasons. One, there probably is a lot of truth to what Iran is saying here, that the forces that Israel is attacking in Syria, they're probably not just targeting Iranian forces, right? They are hitting other people, other groups, Syrian groups preparing to go out and fight against ISIS and things like that are no doubt killed by the hundreds at least airstrikes that they've carried out against Syria over the past few years. But just kind of some nuance here too. Even if Iran is supporting the Syrian war effort and some of these militias, giving them arms and funds and everything like that, they're not necessarily taking direct orders from Tehran or something like that. They are in Syria fighting against the Islamic State because, that's what they're being paid to do. It's not because, they are fighting at the behest of Tehran necessarily. I'm sure a lot of them, don't like the Islamic State and are more than happy to have a job killing ISIS. And so there's probably a lot more nuance. That being said, Israel probably does target some Iranian assets in Syria. Not sure how much of that's been going on lately, who exactly Israel has been killing in Syria lately. One, I guess, a little bit of good news maybe is the way that Iran is downplaying this. If they were saying that Israel is attacking our assets in Syria, maybe it would make it harder, at least for diplomatic, political reasons in Iran, to continue to negotiate with the West on reviving the JCPOA if Israel is actively carrying out a major bombing campaign against your people in a third country. But also, worth noting here how important that narrative really is to the whole Western war effort in Syria, especially everything that Israel is doing. Because if Iran isn't in Syria, Iran is in Syria. But if Iran isn't like the main military force backing the Assad government in Syria, it's really not. Especially at this point, I don't think the ties between Tehran and all the Shia militias are quite what they were when Qasem Soleimani was alive a couple of years ago. To add to that a little bit too, that Israel is just waging an aggressive war in Syria against the Syrian government, because they use this vague thing that any Shia killed in Syria is apparently fighting on behalf of Iran. Because of that claim, they're just allowed to continue to bomb Syria under the pretext that Iran and Israel are locked in this major conflict in the Middle East. And so it's not like this aggressive war waged by Syria. It's just part of the larger Israel in Syria. It's just a part of the larger proxy war. And I really don't think that's what's going on here. All right, so that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. More shows later this week. Have a good day, everyone.